"No man can beat me," she growled. He just smiled. "Try me." The air tasted like copper and burnt ozone. Jonah Reed crouched behind the twisted remains of a mining hauler, his hands slick with blood that wasn't his own, and counted his heartbeats. Each one felt stolen. The colony's emergency klaxons had gone silent 10 minutes ago, which meant the Caliph boarding party had reached the command center, which meant everyone else was dead. He pressed his palm against the deck plating, feeling the hum of boot steps through the metal. 3 sets, moving in formation. They were methodical, these Caliph. Efficient. They'd cut through the colony's defenses like a scalpel through skin, and Jonah had watched from the medical bay as his people, miners, engineers, families, were gunned down with surgical detachment. He'd dragged 2 survivors into a maintenance crawl space before the plasma fire found them anyway. Their names had been Sarah and Dmitri. He'd known them for 6 months. He couldn't remember if he'd locked the crawlspace hatch before he ran. The bootsteps stopped. Jonah's breathing steadied. His medkit was empty except for burn gel and a nearly depleted stim injector. His sidearm held 4 rounds. The Caliph moved in 3s, and they wore armor that could shrug off small arms fire. The math was simple. He was going to die here, in the cargo bay of a mining colony whose name would be forgotten within a week, and no one would know he'd tried. Unless he stood, hands raised, and stepped into the open. The Caliph soldiers swung toward him in perfect unison, weapons tracking his chest. They were tall, easily 6 feet, maybe more, with sleek cobalt armor that seemed to drink the emergency lighting. Their faces were obscured by helmets, but he could see the faint glow of their eyes through the visors. Amber. Predatory. "I'm unarmed," Jonah said, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "Then you die quickly," one of them replied. The voice was female, low and resonant, with a faint growl threading through the vowels. "I'm also the last one alive." "Yes." Jonah swallowed, his heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands didn't shake. "Then I invoke trial right, single combat, your war champion against me." The 3 soldiers went still. For a moment, the only sound was the groan of damaged bulkheads settling. Then the one who'd spoken tilted her helmet, and Jonah caught the flicker of something that might have been surprise. "You know our customs," she said. "I know you honor them." Another pause. Then the soldier tapped the side of her helmet, and her voice shifted, speaking into a comm channel he couldn't hear. 30 seconds later, she lowered her weapon. She said. They escorted him through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times, now scorched and gutted. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at the bodies. If he looked, he'd stop walking. If he stopped walking, he'd never start again. The Caliph didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him, except to adjust their pace when he stumbled over debris. When they reached the landing bay, he saw their ship for the first time. It was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sleek, black, and humming with barely restrained power. The boarding ramp extended like a tongue, and the soldiers gestured for him to climb. Jonah obeyed. The interior was dimly lit, all sharp angles and polished surfaces. He was led to a holding area and told to wait. He waited. An hour passed. Maybe 2. He sat on the bench with his back against the bulkhead and tried not to think about Sarah's daughter, who'd been visiting from the next sector and had probably heard the attack over the comm. Tried not to think about Dimitri's wife, who'd sent a message that morning about the baby being born early. Tried not to think about anything except the dull ache in his ribs and the smell of recycled air. When the door opened, he stood. She was taller than her soldiers, broader across the shoulders, with armor that bore the scars of 100 fights. Her helmet was off, and Jonah's first coherent thought was that she looked nothing like the propaganda hollows. The Caliph were supposed to be monstrous, inhuman. This woman, because she was undeniably a woman, despite the cobalt skin and the burning amber eyes, was neither. Her face was sharp and elegant, framed by a wild mane of orange hair that fell past her shoulders. Her ears were tall and pointed, covered in fine blue fur that darkened at the tips, and they swiveled toward him as she entered, tracking his movements with predatory precision. "I am Sarva," she said. Her voice was deeper than her soldiers, carrying a weight that suggested she didn't need to raise it to be obeyed. "War champion of the Caliph 4th Fleet. You invoke trial right. Why? Jonah met her gaze. Her eyes were unsettling, slitted pupils that dilated and contracted as she studied him as if she could see through skin to muscle and bone. Because you're going to kill the refugee convoy that's 3 jumps behind you, he said. And I can't stop you, but maybe I can slow you down. You cannot. Then it won't cost you much to prove it. Sarva's lips curved just slightly. It wasn't a smile. It was the expression of someone who'd just been offered an insult disguised as a challenge and found it mildly entertaining. You understand what trial right entails, she said. Single combat, unarmed, to first yield or incapacitation. To death if the champion wills it. I'm aware. She stepped closer. Jonah held his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to back away. She was a head taller than him, and up close, he could see the ritual scars carved into her cheekbones, geometric patterns that caught the light. She smelled like ozone and something else, something faintly floral that didn't belong on a warship. What is your name? She asked. Jonah Reed. And what did you do, Jonah Reed, before you decided to die for strangers? I kept people alive. A healer. The word carried a note of contempt. And now you wish to fight a war champion. I don't wish to do anything, Jonah said quietly, but I'm going to anyway. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not respect, not yet, but a flicker of curiosity. She circled him slowly, her gait fluid and deliberate, and he forced himself not to turn with her. Predators chased prey that ran. The trial will take place in 6 hours, Sarva said, on the observation deck before witnesses from both fleets. If you yield, you will be executed. If you are incapacitated, you will be executed. If you somehow survive, I will grant safe passage to your refugee convoy and take you as a prisoner of military interest. Do you accept these terms? Yes. Then prepare yourself. She turned toward the door, then paused. You should know, no human has ever lasted more than 2 minutes against a Caliph war champion. Then I'll make it 3. She glanced back at him, and this time her lips did curve into a smile. It was sharp and dangerous, and it made something in Jonah's chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't name. Yes, Sarva said softly, perhaps you will. The door sealed behind her, and Jonah was alone again. He sat down, flexed his hands, and began to count his heartbeats. Each one felt borrowed now. Stolen from a future he'd never see. He thought about Sarah and Dmitri. He thought about the convoy 3 jumps away carrying 5,000 people who didn't know their lives depended on how long a medic could stay on his feet. He thought about the war champion's smile and the way her ears had pricked forward when he'd spoken, as if she were listening to something more than words. 6 hours. He closed his eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. The observation deck was designed for tactical briefings, not spectacle, but the Caliph had cleared it anyway. Reinforced glass stretched across one wall, revealing the void beyond, stars like scattered diamonds against endless black. Jonah stood at the center of the deck, bare-chested per the trial customs, his skin pale under the harsh lighting. His ribs were taped where he'd cracked them, pulling debris off a dying woman 3 days ago. His knuckles were scabbed. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to bargain with except his body. Sarva stood opposite him, stripped of her armor. She wore only dark-fitted trousers and a sleeveless top that left her arms bare, revealing muscle that moved like coiled cable beneath cobalt skin. Her orange hair was tied back, and without the bulk of her armor, Jonah could see the true architecture of her frame. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, long limbs built for leverage and speed. She rolled her neck, and he heard the vertebrae crack. Between them, War Elder Kethron spoke the ritual words in Caliph. Jonah didn't understand the language, but he understood the tone. Ancient, binding, the kind of words that meant something beyond their syllables. On the far side of the deck, Captain Moss stood with a handful of Jonah's crewmates, refugees who'd been allowed to witness via live transmission. Her face was stone, but her hands were clenched at her sides. Jonah met her eyes once, briefly, and hoped she'd understand what he couldn't say aloud. That this wasn't suicide. That he'd calculated the odds and found a narrow path through them. That he was sorry anyway, just in case. Catherine's voice stopped. Silence fell like a blade. Sarva moved. Jonah twisted left, feeling the displacement of air where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. Her fist hissed past his ear, and he used the momentum to duck under her guard, driving his shoulder into her midsection. It was like hitting a bulkhead. She absorbed the impact without giving ground and brought her knee up toward his ribs. Jonah caught it on his forearm, the bone-jarring force numbing his entire arm, and shoved backward to create distance. She pursued instantly, no hesitation. Her movements were fluid and terrifyingly precise, each strike designed to end the fight in one blow. Jonah didn't try to match her power. He couldn't. Instead, he read her rhythm, the microsecond delay before each attack, and moved just enough to avoid the killing strikes while absorbing the glancing ones. A fist grazed his jaw. An elbow clipped his shoulder. Pain blossomed across his ribs, bright and sharp, but he stayed on his feet. 1 minute. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Sarva feinted left, then pivoted right, her legs sweeping low to take out his knees. Jonah jumped, barely clearing the arc, and landed off balance. She capitalized immediately, closing the distance and driving a palm strike toward his sternum. He deflected it, just barely, and felt the heat of her skin against his. She was warm, impossibly warm. The contact lasted a heartbeat, and then she was spinning away, resetting her stance. Her eyes narrowed. She'd expected him to be down by now. 2 minutes. They circled each other, and Jonah registered the shift in her posture. She was studying him now, the way he'd studied field injuries, looking for the weakness, the vulnerable point. Her ears were pricked forward, tracking every ragged breath he took. He wondered if she could hear his pulse, if she knew how close he was to collapse. She attacked again, faster this time, a flurry of strikes that blurred together, forcing Jonah into pure defensive reaction. Block, dodge, absorb. His vision tunneled, his lungs burned, and then he saw it, the overextension in her left hook, the way her weight shifted forward just a fraction too much. He dropped low, swept her supporting leg, and watched her balance fracture. Sarva hit the deck hard, rolling with the fall, and came up in a crouch. For half a second, they stared at each other. Her amber eyes were wide, pupils dilated. He'd actually knocked her down. The realization hung between them like static electricity. The room erupted. Caliph voices raised in sharp, guttural barks. Outrage or excitement, Jonah couldn't tell. On the human side, he heard Captain Moss shout something, but the words were lost under the roar of blood in his ears. Sarva rose slowly. Her expression had changed. The contempt was gone. In its place was something Jonah recognized from battlefield triage, the look of someone reassessing a situation they'd misjudged. 3 minutes? She came at him again, but this time there was no hesitation in her strikes, no testing. She fought him like an opponent. They traded blows in brutal, breathless exchanges, her power against his endurance, her training against his improvisation. Jonah's body screamed, his taped ribs were on fire, his vision grayed at the edges, but he didn't fall. 4 minutes. Sarva caught him with a spinning back fist that snapped his head to the side, and Jonah tasted blood. He staggered, his legs refusing to obey, and dropped to one knee. The deck was cold beneath his palm. He could end it here. Say the word, yield. It would be over. 5,000 people on the convoy. He thought of the child who'd given him a drawing before they evacuated. Stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. He thought of Captain Moss, who'd pulled him out of a bar fight once and told him he was worth saving even when he didn't believe it. He stood. Sarva went still. Her chest heaved with exertion, her skin glistening under the lights. Her ears flattened back, and for the first time, Jonah saw something in her expression that looked almost like respect. "Yield," she said. Her voice was rough, breathless. "No, you cannot win. I don't need to win." She moved. One final strike, a controlled blow aimed at his temple, precise enough to incapacitate without killing. Jonah saw it coming and knew he couldn't avoid it. He turned into it instead, accepting the impact, and drove his fist into her exposed side with everything he had left. They both hit the ground. The room went silent. Jonah's ears rang. His mouth was full of blood. He tried to push himself up and failed. His arms wouldn't support him. He turned his head, blinking through the haze, and saw Sarva on her hands and knees beside him, breathing hard. Neither of them was unconscious. Neither of them had yielded. Catherine's voice cut through the silence, sharp with disbelief. Jonah didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This had never happened before. Sarva climbed to her feet, moving stiffly, and offered him her hand. Jonah stared at it, at the blue fingers, the sharp claws, the ritual scars across her knuckles. He took it. Her grip was warm and steady, and she pulled him upright with effortless strength. They stood face to face, both swaying, both bloodied. "You lasted 5 minutes," she said quietly. "I'll do better next time." Her lips twitched. "There will be no next time. I grant safe passage to your convoy," as agreed. Relief crashed through him, so intense it nearly buckled his knees. Captain Moss would get them out. The refugees would live. It had been worth it. "And you," Sarva continued, her gaze steady, "are now a prisoner of military interest. You will be transported to my flagship." Jonah nodded. He'd expected that. As the Caliph soldiers moved forward to escort him away, he caught Sarva watching him. Her expression was unreadable, her amber eyes tracking his movements with the same intensity she'd shown during the fight. But there was something else there now, something he couldn't name but felt in the way her ears tilted forward when he met her gaze. As the door sealed behind him, Jonah realized he felt it too. 3 days in the brig gave Jonah time to catalog his injuries. 2 cracked ribs confirmed, bruised kidney, fractured knuckle on his left hand. The Caliph had provided medical care, efficient, impersonal, and left him alone in a cell that was cleaner than most human military quarters he'd occupied. He spent the hours running through trauma scenarios in his head, keeping his mind sharp, refusing to think about what came next. When the door opened, it wasn't a guard, it was Sarva. She stood in the entrance, still in uniform but without her ceremonial armor. In the dim light of the brig, her blue skin seemed darker, and her orange hair was loose around her shoulders. She carried a data tablet and didn't waste time on preamble. "Come with me," she said. Jonah stood. His body protested, but he kept his expression neutral. "Where?" "My quarters, we need to talk." He followed her through corridors that thrummed with the low pulse of the ship's engines. Crew members stepped aside as they passed, their amber eyes tracking Jonah with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Sarva ignored them all. She moved with the same fluid grace he'd seen in the arena, her tall ears swiveling at every sound, constantly alert. Her quarters were larger than he'd expected, but sparse. Functional furniture, no personal effects except for a single weapon mounted on the wall, the ceremonial war axe from her armor. She gestured for him to sit at a table and activated the data tablet between them. "An unknown faction has been sabotaging supply lines," she said without preamble. "Both Caliph and human. 3 freighters destroyed in the past month, all carrying medical supplies or fuel. The attacks show tactical knowledge of both our logistics networks." Jonah leaned forward, studying the data. "You think it's coordinated?" "I know it is, but I don't know by whom." She met his eyes. "You understand human military tactics. You survived an attack that killed everyone else in your colony. You think strategically, even under duress. And you need someone who won't lie to you." "Yes, me." Sarva's ears flattened slightly. "Because you fought me without honor codes or ritual. You fought to survive. That kind of pragmatism is rare. And because..." She paused, her clawed fingers tapping once against the table. "Because you are the only human I trust not to serve your command structure over the truth." Jonah absorbed that. "What do you want from me?" "Help me investigate. Analyze the attack patterns. Identify who benefits from prolonging this war." She leaned back, her posture deceptively casual. "In exchange, I will grant you communication access to Captain Moss and your convoy. Monitored but private." It wasn't a request. But it also wasn't an order. Jonah studied her face, looking for the angle he was missing. Her expression remained unreadable, but her ears were pricked forward, listening, waiting. "All right," he said, "show me everything." They worked through the night cycle. Sarva's command of human linguistics was flawless, but her understanding of human behavior had gaps that surprised him. She didn't understand why civilian ships would carry weapons. She couldn't fathom why captains would deviate from optimal routes to avoid populated areas. Jonah explained scarcity, explained desperation, explained the difference between orders and judgment calls. She listened, not with the condescension he'd expected, but with focused intensity, her eyes tracking his gestures, her ears shifting with each inflection of his voice. "Your people value individual choice over collective efficiency," she said at one point. "We value both, we just weight them differently. That is a weakness in war. Maybe, but it's also why we keep fighting when the math says we should surrender." Her gaze sharpened. "Is that why you challenged me? Individual choice over logical outcome?" "No, I challenged you because surrendering meant 5,000 people died. The math said I had a chance, small but real, of buying them time." "The math said you would die." "I did die," Jonah said quietly. "Everyone I knew is gone. I'm just the part still walking around." Sarva went very still. Her ears tilted back, and for a moment something shifted in her expression. Not pity, but recognition, as if she understood the weight of carrying ghosts. "You dishonor them by speaking as if you are not alive," she said finally. "I'm a medic. I'm supposed to keep people breathing. You are a warrior. You fought. You survived. That is honor enough." The words landed harder than any blow from their duel. Jonah looked away, unable to hold her gaze, and focused on the data tablet. After a moment, she did the same. 4 days later, they were assigned to investigate a derelict station near the disputed border. The reconnaissance was supposed to be simple: scan the wreckage, retrieve data logs, return. They took a 2-person shuttle, leaving Talon's Edge behind, and Jonah caught himself relaxing for the first time since the colony fell. In the confined space of the shuttle, with only the hum of engines and the stars outside, the war felt distant. Sarva piloted with the same precision she fought with, her hands moving across the controls without hesitation. Jonah watched the way her ears tracked sounds he couldn't hear, the shift in engine pitch, the faint crackle of radiation from a nearby debris field. "You hear things we don't," he said. "Yes, your auditory range is limited, it is inefficient. We make up for it in other ways." She glanced at him, one ear swiveling in his direction. "How?" "We talk constantly, we use language to fill the gaps. That is exhausting." "Probably, but it means we're rarely alone even in silence." Sarva considered that, her gaze returning to the viewport. "Caliph do not speak without purpose. Silence is connection. Shared space without demand." "Is that why you don't have music?" Her ears pricked up sharply. "Music?" Jonah reached for his personal effects, returned to him under Sarva's authority, and pulled out a small audio device. He keyed it on, and the cabin filled with sound. Strings and percussion, human voices layered in harmony. It was an old song, one his mother had played when he was young, soft and haunting. Sarva's entire body went rigid. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating, and her ears flattened back before slowly tilting forward again. She tilted her head, the gesture so feline it took Jonah's breath away, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked vulnerable. "What is this?" she whispered. "Music. Organized sound. Humans make it to express things we don't have words for." "It is." She trailed off, her clawed hand lifting toward the speaker before stopping mid-reach. "I feel it. Here." She pressed her palm to her chest, as if it is speaking directly to something inside me. Jonah's throat tightened. That's the point. They sat in silence. Not the Caliph kind, but the human kind, filled with shared sound, and something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of understanding that transcended species. The station loomed ahead, dark and gutted, and Sarva killed the music reluctantly. They docked, suited up, and entered through a shattered airlock. The interior was a maze of collapsed corridors and floating debris. Jonah's helmet light cut through the darkness, illuminating walls scored with plasma burns. "This wasn't an accident," Sarva said, her voice crackling through the comm. "No, this was execution." They pushed deeper, following the trail of destruction, until the station itself betrayed them. Automated defenses activated without warning, turrets that shouldn't have had power, mines that shouldn't have been armed. Sarva shoved Jonah into cover as the corridor exploded behind them. and they ran. The passage ahead collapsed, and Jonah grabbed Sarva's arm, pulling her through a maintenance shaft as the ceiling came down. They tumbled into the next section, and he landed hard on his injured ribs. Pain whited out his vision. He gasped, struggling to breathe, and felt Sarva's hands on his shoulders. "Breathe, Jonah, breathe." He focused on her voice, on the pressure of her grip, and forced air into his lungs. When his vision cleared, she was kneeling beside him, her amber eyes wide behind her visor. "You pulled me out," she said. "You would have done the same." "No," her voice was rough. "I would have calculated survival odds and left you." "Then I guess we're different." Her ears flattened. "Yes, we are." They made it back to the shuttle, barely, and sat in silence as the automated systems ran diagnostics. Jonah stripped off his helmet and leaned back against the bulkhead, exhausted. Sarva removed hers as well, and her orange hair spilled free, wild and tangled. "Why did you challenge me?" she asked suddenly. Jonah turned to her, surprised by the question. "I told you, to buy time for the convoy." "No, why did you believe you could survive?" He thought about it, about Sarah and Dmitri, about the child's drawing, about the medic's creed he'd taken when he was too young to understand what it meant. "Because I had to prove to myself that I hadn't given up," he said quietly, "that I could still fight for something, even if it was hopeless." Sarva studied him, her gaze unreadable. Then she did something he didn't expect. She spoke in her own language, the words guttural and melodic at once, and he heard the weight behind them even without translation. "In Kalith culture," she said, switching back to human standard, "your refusal to surrender would have earned you a warrior's name, a title that marks you as one who cannot be broken." The intimacy of the confession hung between them, unexpected and dangerous. Jonah felt something shift in his chest, not attraction, not yet, but the recognition that this woman saw him, truly saw him, not as a prisoner or an enemy, but as someone worth naming. "Thank you," he managed. Sarva nodded once, then turned back to the controls. But her ears stayed tilted toward him, listening, and Jonah understood what she'd been trying to explain about silence. They were no longer alone. Tavrek's ambush came 3 days after they returned from the derelict station. Jonah was in Sarva's quarters, cross-referencing supply manifests, when the door opened without chime or warning. Tavrek entered, flanked by 2 guards, his pale yellow eyes fixed on Jonah with predatory focus. "War champion," he said, his voice soft and mocking. "I bring troubling news. Your human prisoner has been communicating with insurgent forces. Coordinates transmitted from this very ship led to the destruction of the medical frigate Cathara. 300 Kalith dead." Sarva rose slowly, her posture deceptively calm. "That is a serious accusation." "It is fact." Tavrek tossed a data chip onto the table. "Encrypted transmissions traced to his access codes." Jonah's blood went cold. He recognized the setup immediately, the kind of falsified evidence that was impossible to disprove without forensic analysis that took weeks. Tavrek had timed it perfectly. "Sarva," Jonah said quietly. She held up one hand, silencing him. Her amber eyes never left Tavrek. "I will review the evidence myself." "War Elder Kethrin has already reviewed it. He orders the humans' immediate execution, to restore honor to our fleet." Tavrek's lips curved. "You will perform the execution, War Champion, or you will be relieved of command for dereliction of duty." The room went silent. Jonah felt the walls closing in, the familiar weight of inevitability settling over him. He'd bought the convoy time. That would have to be enough. But Sarva didn't move toward him. She moved toward Tavrek. "Get out of my quarters," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Tavrek's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked. "You refuse a direct order?" "I refuse to execute a prisoner without proper investigation, and I refuse to accept evidence provided by an officer whose supply requisitions show irregularities matching the sabotage patterns we've been tracking." She took another step forward. "Did you think I wouldn't notice, Tavrek, that your logistics clearances align perfectly with every attack?" His ears flattened. "You accuse me based on the word of a human?" "I accuse you based on data. Leave now." For a moment, Jonah thought Tavrek might attack. The tension coiled tight enough to snap. Then Tavrek turned and strode out, his guards following, the door sealed behind them. Sarva's shoulders dropped fractionally. She stood facing the door, her back to Jonah, and when she spoke, her voice was rough. "You need to leave this ship."
"Sarva."
"He will come back, with authorization or without it, and I cannot." She turned, and Jonah saw the conflict in her eyes. "I cannot decide which loyalty matters more, my duty to my people or my certainty that you are innocent. That conflict will kill us both." Jonah stood, his ribs protested, but he ignored them. "Then help me prove he's lying." "There is no time." "Then we make time." She stared at him, her ears pressed flat against her skull. "Why do you trust me? I could execute you right now. Obey orders, restore my honor." "Because you won't." Jonah met her gaze. "Because you're not looking at me like I'm prey anymore. You're looking at me like I matter." Something broke in her expression. She crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and gripped his shoulders, her claws pressing through his shirt without breaking skin. "You do matter," she said fiercely, "and that terrifies me more than any battle I have fought." Before Jonah could respond, alarm screamed through the ship. Sarva released him and activated her comm, her face going hard as she listened to the incoming report. When she looked back at him, her decision was already made. "Tavrek is launching a shuttle assault on your convoy. He's framing it as retaliation for the Cathara." She moved to a wall panel and keyed in her command codes. "I'm getting you out of here. There's a maintenance shuttle in Bay 7. Go." "Not without you." "Jonah? Not without you?" She studied his face, searching for something. Then she nodded once, grabbed her ceremonial axe from the wall, and they ran. They made it to the bay with Tavrek's forces minutes behind them. Sarva sealed the door and bought them time while Jonah prepped the shuttle. When she climbed into the co-pilot's seat, her uniform was scorched and her breathing labored, but her eyes were clear. "I am now a traitor to my people," she said as they launched. "Welcome to the club." Her ears twitched. "Is that human humor?" "Bad human humor." "I see." She almost smiled. Then the proximity alarms shrieked, and they were fighting for their lives against pursuit craft that had no interest in taking them alive. They crashed on a moon. Not a landing. A crash. The shuttle's landing gear buckled, and they skidded across frozen ground until momentum and friction reached an uneasy truce. Jonah's head cracked against the console, and stars exploded behind his eyes. When his vision cleared, Sarva was pulling him from the wreckage, her strength undeniable even with her own injuries. The moon's atmosphere was thin but breathable, rocky, cold, the kind of place where survival was measured in hours, not days. They found shelter in a cave system and jury-rigged a distress beacon from the shuttle's remains. Then they sat, backs against stone, and waited. "Why did you save me?" Jonah asked. Sarva was quiet for a long moment, her ears flat against her skull. "Because I cannot reconcile the human I know with the enemy my culture taught me to despise, and that terrifies me." "I'm just a medic." "No." She turned to him, her amber eyes catching the faint light from their emergency beacon. "You are the first person to look at me and see something other than a weapon. You saw someone worth sharing music with, worth trusting in silence." Jonah's chest tightened. "Sarva, let me finish." Her voice was rough, strained. "In my culture, we do not speak of emotion. We show it through action, through partnership in battle, through the willingness to stand beside someone when all logic says to walk away." She reached out slowly, giving him time to refuse, and placed her hand over his. "I am standing beside you. Do you understand what that means?" He did. The weight of it settled over him like gravity. "Yes," he said quietly. Her fingers curled around his, warm and careful despite the claws. They sat like that, hands joined, while the moon turned beneath them and the stars wheeled overhead. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was simpler and more profound. 2 people choosing each other when the galaxy said they shouldn't. When the rescue shuttle arrived, Captain Moss's vessel, guided by their beacon, Sarva didn't let go of his hand until the airlock sealed behind them. The conspiracy unraveled quickly after that. The evidence they'd gathered, combined with testimony from both sides, exposed Tavrek and his coalition of war profiteers. An emergency ceasefire was called, tentative, fragile, but real. Sarva was offered a position as liaison between species, permanent exile from traditional Kalith military structures in exchange for a chance to build something new. Jonah found her on the observation deck of the joint outpost they'd established, staring out at the stars. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Give up your place with your people. Not for me." She turned, and the expression on her face was softer than he'd ever seen. "I am not doing it for you. I am doing it for the person I have become because of you." She paused. "That is the difference." Jonah stepped closer. "What happens now?" "We choose." Sarva reached out and took his hand, her blue fingers lacing through his scarred ones. The gesture violated every rule she'd been raised with and honored every truth she'd learned. Every day, we choose. That is enough. Behind them, the observation deck door opened. A child entered, one of the orphans from the colony attack, clutching a worn stuffed animal. She stopped when she saw Sarva, her eyes wide but not afraid. Sarva knelt slowly, making herself smaller, and held out her hand, palm up, the universal gesture of peace. The child approached cautiously, then placed her small hand in Sarva's larger one. "You're blue," the child whispered. "Yes, that's pretty." Sarva's ears tilted forward and something in her expression cracked open. "Thank you." Jonah watched them, his throat tight, and understood what Sarva had been trying to tell him. That strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was the courage to be gentle when gentleness cost you everything you'd built your identity on. Later, when the child had gone and they were alone again, Sarva and Jonah stood at the viewport watching ships from both fleets dock at the outpost, human and Kalith, working together for the first time in generations. It would be difficult. It would be messy, but it would be real. "Do you regret challenging me?" Sarva asked. Jonah thought about the colony, about Sarah and Dimitri, about 5,000 refugees who'd lived because he'd refused to accept defeat, about the woman beside him whose hand was warm in his. "No," he said, "because you didn't just accept the challenge, you met me halfway." Sarva's fingers tightened around his, and they stood together in comfortable silence, the humankind and the Kalith kind existing simultaneously, anchored to each other as the galaxy shifted around them.